Okay, let's recap what we've covered so far as we're scaling the leadership pyramid. We began down in the basement, a subterranean lair, level 0 with the barbarian boss. Many of you have worked for the barbarian boss. The barbarian is at level 0 because everything that he or she earns at the end of their angry tongue or their bullwhip and their slave-driving ways, they lose out the back door in the form of lower morale, lower productivity, higher absenteeism, higher turnover, and outright sabotage. As we climbed, we talked about level 1, above ground. This is what I call the benign boss. I could call this person the basic boss, but I prefer the medical term benign to contrast level 1 from level 0. The barbarian is toxic, damaging to the organization and to other people, and malignant. But a benign boss is not that at all. The benign boss is like a benign cyst. Harmless. The benign boss doesn't really manage people, they just manage their schedules, they manage the inventory. All of the authority and power wielded by the benign boss is derived simply from having a position or a title in the organization. This is the entry level to leadership. There's nothing wrong with being at level 1. Everybody has to start here, but you don't want to stay here for very long. It's a thankless existence. Being a benign boss is like running a cemetery. You got a lot of people under you, but nobody's listening. It's a laugh track. I'm sitting alone in my back bedroom. As we climb the leadership pyramid, we come to level 2, which is the benevolent boss. Still a boss, leadership begins at level 3 that we'll talk about later. A benevolent boss is still a boss, but is at least one that is liked by his or her reports. And the benevolent boss always gets more in the long run out of their people than the barbarian, all other factors being equal, for one reason, and I can summarize it in one word: allies. If your people like you, they will try to help you succeed. If they dislike you, they won't try to help you, and in fact, they may even try to undermine your success. Now, there are 3 ingredients in the recipe for the benevolent boss. The first we've already talked about. It was to be pleasant. Be nice to your people. Secondly, was to be positive, that is to be upbeat and optimistic and smiling. If you're going to be effective, you have to be positive and upbeat because no one wants to follow anyone into a bleaker future. And that brings us current with the 3rd ingredient, which we'll cover in just a moment. But I know how boring it can be to just sit at your desk staring at a computer screen for a webinar, so I want to add an interactive portion here. I'm going to place here the 12 numbers from a clock face. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to mentally select any single number from this clock face, and then we will use it to count around the clock face in a clockwise direction. Now, regardless of what number you select, in a moment, I am going to ask you to touch your screen starting at 12 o'clock, and then to move around the circle in a clockwise direction, spelling your number. For example, if you choose 2, you would spell T-W-O, and your new secret number would become 3. If, on the other hand, you thought of 11, you would still start at 12, but you would count E-L-E-V-E-N, and your new secret number would be 6. Got the ground rules down? Excellent. Put your finger on 12, and now begin to count around the circle in a clockwise direction, spelling your secret number. Excellent. Now look at where your finger is. That is your new secret number. Continue around the circle, spelling the new number. Excellent. Now I'm here and you're there, but somehow I know that your finger is not on 7. We'll eliminate it. Look at your secret number, the one under your finger now, and continue around the clock spelling that number. If you get to 12, just continue all the way around the circle for a new lap. And I will eliminate 11. Look at your secret number, continue by spelling it around the circle. And I know that your finger is not on 8 or 1. Look at your secret number under your finger right now. Continue around the circle spelling this secret number. If you come to an empty space, just skip over it as though it weren't there at all. And leave your finger there. And I will eliminate 2 and 4. Nor is your finger on 6, 9, or 12. It's one of these 3 numbers right here. Now, I'm going to throw a wild card in. I want you to ignore the number that is under your finger right now and just imagine one from 1 to 20. And then I want you to spell it either in a clockwise direction or a counterclockwise, just to throw me off the scent. Go ahead and do that now. Excellent. Now, leave your finger where it is and look at your new secret number beneath your finger. Now, in a clockwise direction, spell your number as you did before, and I will eliminate these. Because you have placed your finger on 10. That's where we're going to make you an absolute 10 of a leader. And if you're going to do that, you're going to have to blow right through the benevolent level, which, as we discussed, was to be pleasant and be positive. That brings us current with this point. The third ingredient is to be personal. I did not say personable. That would go under the be pleasant category. You must be personally involved with and interested in the lives of your people. It is insufficient merely to tell your employees that they do a good job, that you've noticed, and that you appreciate it, although that is very important in its own right. The boss that doesn't understand this is like the husband who says, I have no idea why my wife left me. I told her all the time what a great housekeeper she is. Marriage is not just a mutually agreed upon division of labor between members of a household. It is first and foremost a relationship, right? Leadership is too. In the 1990s, a psychologist and family therapist named Dr. John Gottman discovered that he could predict divorce in any given married couple with 90% accuracy simply by comparing the ratio of positive to negative interactions between the partners. His studies with thousands of couples over many, many years led him to the conclusion that if only 4 out of every 5, that's 80% of exchanges between a husband and wife were positive ones, that was insufficient to keep them together over the long haul. There was a 90% chance that in 7 years they would no longer be a couple. He concluded that in order to be in the safe range, at least 7 out of every 8, or 87.5% of encounters between partners must be uplifting, fun, positive, encouraging, or edifying. I call this the magic ratio, my term, not his. Let me ask you a question. Which is easier, to quit your job and go get a new one, or to leave your spouse and go find a new husband or wife? I think while we could all agree that neither one is any picnic, the divorce scenario is potentially much more disruptive, right? You lose half of your net worth, probably half of your friends. You have to move out of one big household down into 2 smaller ones and live on a fraction of what you had before. You have to split time with the kids, involve judges and courts and lawyers and decrees and alimony and child support payments. And that doesn't even count the emotional heartache. The implication should be clear, but just in case it's not, let me phrase it in the form of a question. If at least 7 out of every 8 encounters must be positive to keep a spouse I love from leaving me and running off with the neighbor, considering the fact that it is much, much easier to leave your boss than it is to leave your spouse, what percentage of exchanges must be uplifting and encouraging to keep an employee I value from leaving me and going to work for my competition? Here's the answer. More than 7 out of 8. Higher than 87.5%. How much higher? I have no idea. I'm not aware that there's ever been a study that attempted to quantify that, but as a rule of thumb, you'd better just assume that at least 9 out of every 10 exchanges that you have with an employee must be uplifting and positive to keep that employee loyal to you, on your team, and loyal to your company. Now, how do you keep an employee loyal? I encourage leaders to view their relationship with every single employee as a separate and distinct checking account. Long before you ever make a withdrawal from that account in the form of a reprimand, a letter in the file, an angry word, or a denied request, you better make sure you already have enough in the bank to cover it. Because once you're withdrawn, they leave. Or worse still, they don't leave. They stay right where they are. They become a part of the resistance. They join a 5th column and seek to undermine you and keep you from succeeding. How do you make deposits in the bank of goodwill? Every time you call an employee by name, you're making a small deposit. Every time you look an employee in the eyes, smile warmly, and ask them, how was their weekend? that's a deposit. Every time you sincerely ask an employee, is there anything else I can provide for you that will enable you to do your job better? That's a deposit. Every time you ask them if their mother is out of the hospital yet, or if their trick knee is acting up today, that's a deposit. Every time you ask whether their son got into the football game last Friday night, that's a deposit. If you know the kid's name, it's a bigger deposit. If you know the position the kid plays, that's an even bigger deposit. Every time you casually work their pet's name into a conversation, every time you send them a link to an article about their favorite hobby, that is a deposit. And you must never miss an opportunity to make a deposit, because you never know when a situation will arise that will require you to make a major withdrawal. It might happen tomorrow. Something might occur that will require you to chew an employee out. And that's why you are constantly disciplining yourself to save up for a rainy day, because you never know when it's going to happen. In 2013, U.S. Army Captain William Swenson was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for his acts of heroism at the Battle of Ganjgal, Afghanistan on September 8, 2009. He had been leading a patrol when suddenly they found themselves ambushed, surrounded on three sides, and taking heavy casualties, including 5 of his soldiers killed in action that day. Among his many acts of bravery cited by Congress was the fact that he repeatedly charged into enemy fire to rescue the wounded and to retrieve the dead. By sheer coincidence, a medevac helicopter pilot just happened to be wearing a GoPro camera on his helmet, caught one of those rescues on camera. In that herky-jerky, almost unwatchable footage, Captain Swenson and a colleague, a fellow soldier, can be seen helping a sergeant who had been shot in the neck off the battlefield, and then loading him into the helicopter. And then a very unusual thing happens. Captain Swenson leans over and kisses the wounded man on the side of the head before turning and running back to the battlefield for more. Let me ask you a question. How do you suppose his other soldiers felt when they heard about that kiss? You see, Captain Swenson had no idea that he was being videoed and could not possibly have anticipated that that kiss would be posted to YouTube, go viral, and seen by millions. I submit to you that his soldiers felt cared about as human beings, not just as valuable soldiers in the unit. That they looked at their captain and said, "This is not blood and guts General George Patton, hurling tens of thousands of young men into a meat grinder while standing behind in comparative safety declaring, 'God, how I love it.'" Let me ask you another question. Do you suppose his soldiers from that day forward would be more or less willing to follow him into battle? I submit to you that from that day forward, they would follow him into hell with a wet sponge. If he were going after Jaws in a canoe, they would hop in right beside him and pack tartar sauce. He could chew them out every morning, noon, and night for the remainder of their tour of duty, and I'll bet they would still love him and follow him to the death, because he topped off every emotional bank account in his platoon that day. Now, you will probably never have an opportunity to make a major deposit in an employee's bank account, and that is really a shame. And it is terribly unfair, because emotional bank accounts are not like monetary accounts. If you need to write a check for $10, you only need $11 in the account to cover it. But in an emotional bank account, in the bank of goodwill, you can only withdraw 10% before you're overdrawn. Why? It's the magic ratio, remember? This is because being reproved or getting a letter in the file is often received as so scathing and so damaging that they brood over it for weeks or months. And it takes at least 9 or 10 positive exchanges with you to counterbalance it. And I'm just grabbing the number 10 out of the air. It might be 20, 30, or 40. What do I know? And it's probably different for every individual employee. Let's use an example. Suppose you're walking down the hall and a colleague says, "Looking good." But then 10 seconds later, another colleague passes you in the hall and says, "Oh my God, what happened to you? You look horrible." Which one has the greater emotional impact? And which one lasts longer? I suppose that it would probably take 8 or 9 or 10 other colleagues to tell you you look great for you to then to conclude that that second employee, that second colleague was just out of their mind or having a bad day or trying to hurt your feelings. In the bank of goodwill, here is the hard, cold reality. Deposits are almost always made in pennies, nickels, and dimes. Withdrawals are almost always taken in dollars. And so you must discipline yourself never to miss an opportunity to make a deposit in each employee's bank account to be ready when you need to make a withdrawal. Now, one quick caveat, we are assuming that we are talking about an employee that you want to keep. If this is an employee that you wish would quit, all bets are off. You just write all the rubber checks you think you can justify to upper management and let the chips fall where they may. But if it's an employee that you want to keep and that you value and you want to be loyal to you and to your organization, you'd better not just be pleasant and be positive. You must be personally involved with them. That completes level 2. Now we move on to level 3, during which you will become an actual leader, the builder phase.